Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Monday's episode of Trending. I'm Jamie. Joining me is Richard all week this week as Gareth is across in Mexico. This morning's show is brought to you by the brand new range of Ickonic coffee, available in both grounded and whole beans. Thank you to all of those of you that have purchased it already. All of it goes to support what we do here and making more content. If you use the code TRENDING, you'll get 10% off any orders you make. Rich, how are you doing on this fine morning?
I'm good. It's good to be back today here on a Monday morning, diving into these trending stories, Jay.
Absolutely. Well, you got four early mornings in a row, mate. Although you only have to walk a few meters to get into your studio, so you got no excuse. Right, let's go in. What are we going to first?
We're going to go to Trump first, and I do apologise that we're going to Trump first. But you've just got to see how is. Hello, you're right.
Sorry, I can't deal with the fact you said I'm going to Trump first.
Well, I usually wait till we record. I go before we record because you never know, do you? You don't get caught short. But we're going to go to Mr. Trump this time, although that's what we call it in our house anyway. Israel lobby director. Sorry, I have to read this off the phone because there's a lot going on here. This is the amount of money that Donald Trump's received from Israel's lobby since 2016. So he's definitely going to be impartial when it comes to Israel, isn't he? We all know that he's part of this Chabad guys and this Messianic love. But he's had over 230 million since 2016 from Israel-connected lobby groups. Now, how do you think that's going to affect his stance on Israel? Not that he needed it anyway, because he only got the money because he was pro-Israel anyway. And don't they all need to sign I will do what Israel tells me to do?
Yeah, the pledge.
The pledge before they start. But this is what he got. So this was a really weird one, though. Israel lobby direct campaign contribution, $198 in 2016. I wonder what that was for. I don't know. Dinner?
I can't think of anything sensible to say, so I'll say nothing.
And then it goes up from there. The same people, 894,000, 4,000, 245,000. It goes all the way through. You've got Preserve America, which is Adelson, on there with loads of contributions. 112 million, 102 million there. Jews Choose More Years PAC. That's a mouthful. That was 245,000. And RJC Victory Fund was the most recent ones. I'm not sure who that is, but that is all adds up to over 230 million that he's got from Israel lobbies. Now, anyone can't tell me that he is not. Well, we know what he's doing, clearly. But you cannot deny the facts and figures. That's from AIPAC Tracker, which are fantastic. It's just pointing out every time he brings someone to office, they are funded by AIPAC, and 230 million since 2016. I mean, come on. We knew it anyway, but to see it broken down like that is really interesting.
And that's just what's disclosed, mate. I'm sure there's more that comes through back channels that doesn't look like it's coming from there or doesn't look like it's going to him, but it does. I think the whole concept of lobbying and lobby groups is just bribing, really. Lobby means bribe. People don't donate. Rich and influential business operators, political figures, they don't donate money for a laugh. They don't do it because out of the goodness of their heart. They do it because they're getting something in return. And, we've seen that time and time again. Whoever the lobby group is, not just appropriate to this conversation about AIPAC and Trump, it's, viable to everyone. You look at, in this country, you've got Dale Vince, the guy that owns a lot of green energy stuff. He's massive donator to the Labour Party, and since they've become the government, they've obviously gone even more crazy on the net zero stuff, which is obviously going to then benefit him in many different ways. That, for me, is just the whole concept of it is backward. And the fact that it's so kind of in the open and accepted that lobbying happens. I understand you're going to want, people to lobby for ideas and maybe suggestions, and you would think that a government, you would counsel top leaders in different sectors to get their advice on how you may deal with a certain issue or tackle a certain situation. I get that. That's fine. That's what you do in life. You seek people that you think have more experience than you in whatever the subject is to get their thoughts before you maybe make a decision. But the idea those people give you money and then tell you what to do and you just do it, that's bribing. And if that happened in any other circle, it would be called out and it would not be acceptable. If that happened in football, if the club bribed the referee to give certain decisions, that would not be allowed. So it's basically, for me, it's exactly the same. The whole concept of lobbying is completely disgusting. And AIPAC are the biggest lobby group in America by far, aren't they, Rich, in terms of their influence?
They are, and it's not just the lobbying part is one part, but when the people that are lobbying you have got such an extreme ideology behind them, then that is the worrying part. So when I talk about these bad guys around Trump, it's not because they're just around Trump and it's a bit like, religion shouldn't really meet in with politics, although clearly it does. It's the extreme nature of their ideology and what that means for the West, that they're gathering around all of these people. That's why it's so concerning that they're around Zelensky, Putin, that they're around Trump, and they're around RFK Jr. They are not just lobbying them for political gains. The political gains and the political movements are chess moves towards an ideology, which is terrible for those who are not involved in that ideology. It's no different from a cult giving money to the president. It is absolutely no different.
Well, that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. And that's why we should be so worried and concerned when you look into the ideology and you find out that they're the ones funding your president. Then everything that this president does and everything that he puts through, and his mates like Musk, Peter Thiel, then you understand how that fits into bringing this ideology about. That's the point. That's the agenda. And that's why it's so worrying that he is involved with these people and funded by these people.
And one of the crazy things is, I remember the 2016 election very well. I was actually in America through quite a lot of that year in the lead up to it. And I remember during one of the debates, Trump talking about the fact that the reason the left-wing media and the reason the corporations or some of them were going for him is because he didn't want their money. He didn't need their money. He was self-funded, whereas nobody else on this stage could claim that. I remember it was one of the early Republican primaries when you had, your Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, you had those people still involved in the race. And that's what he said. He said, no one else on this stage can claim that, whereas I can. I don't need their money. And this, I think, was at the time when Trump was still considered a bit of a novelty candidate. I don't think anyone had taken him too seriously at that point in the eyes of the general public and wider media. But I thought that line was very telling at the time, because that is what, in a sense, has brought him so much credibility with his base, is that they see him as a self-funded man, a man in isolation that does what he wants. He doesn't answer to anybody because he's not financially dependent on anybody. But it was interesting that those numbers you read out started in 2016. They didn't start in 2020 or 2024. They started in that period that he was claiming to be the only man that was self-funded in that debate, when clearly that was a complete lie. And anyone that has observed much of what Donald Trump said over the years will know that lying is something that comes quite naturally and very easily to him. But it's very interesting that even back as far as 2016, when he was still considered not really a viable candidate until quite late in the day, really, after the Republican National Convention, when he got the nomination ahead of Ted Cruz, that he was already getting money from them. So clearly he was chosen from then, and what he's done since and what he's been involved in since just ratifies that for me, that he's absolutely the chosen one to bring in this next stage. And the fact that he claimed to be self-funded, and that will have earned him a lot of credibility with people, because most people in politics or that observe politics don't like the idea of corporations and lobby groups and pharmaceutical companies having an influence on policy. So by him claiming that he wasn't funded by them, that will have again led people to believe that he wasn't influenced by them, when, as those stats you've just read out show, that he clearly was and is and will always be, unfortunately.
Yeah,
for all the Trumpers, sadly.
Yeah, just something to add to that before we move on to the next story is that we all know that he was under the control of the Rothschilds from the late 80s, early 90s, at least. And his father was Trump was born into this kind of supporting these bad guys all of his life. So we know that the Rothschilds organized his bailout in the early 90s through Wilbur Ross. We know that. So he wasn't self-funded. He wasn't self-funded at all. He went broke towards the end of the 80s, completely broke. And they bailed him out by restructuring his debts. So he has never been self-funded. So when he's saying in 2016, I'm self-funded, that's a complete lie. That's not his money. He's been propped up for at least 15, 16 years, or that had been about, 26 years by that point, and by the Rothschilds at the very least. And that would go back further than that relationship. But we know for a fact that Wilbur Ross, for the Rothschilds, the head of Rothschild bankruptcy arm, bailed Trump out and reorganized his debts via the Rothschilds. So that's total nonsense from the start.
Yeah, it is. When you look into the Trumps and the history of the family and also his finances and things like that, as you just alluded to, it's a very, very interesting story, and it certainly leads you to some interesting places. So we're going to move on to another story, which is a major story. It's making the headlines right across the world this morning, and it kind of follows on from what we've just been talking about, because the Ukraine-Russia conflict was one of Trump's biggest claims when he was running for president, that he would have it sorted in 24 hours. Obviously, we're a good few weeks down the road now, and that hasn't happened. However, something is happening at the moment, and it's very interesting to observe the reactions on both sides of the debate to it, and also what may come of it. So, there's peace talks starting tomorrow between the US Secretary of State, Mark Rubio, and a Russian delegation. They're happening in Saudi Arabia. Supposedly, Ukraine and the European Union, other European nations, have not been invited to these talks. The US have said that this is basically meeting one. They don't expect the conflict to be resolved in a day. They expect this to be the start of a conversation, essentially beginning dialogue. And then when there is something more tangible to discuss in the idea of a deal, concessions, X, Y, and Z, and a ceasefire agreement, that's when the Europeans and the Ukrainians will come to the table and be invited. So obviously, Zelensky, the action man, as Gareth calls him, his ego has taken a battering here in the eyes of the public perception. Whether that's, behind the scenes, this is all part of the plan, almost certainly. But in the eyes of the public, his ego's taken a battering. Trump's come in, pushed him to one side and gone, basically, hold my beer, I'll sort this. Which, is exactly what Trump's natural base expected him to do. So maybe there's a bit of lip service there. What comes of this is going to be interesting in the next few days. But one thing that I've observed initially that's been really fascinating to watch, I put a tweet up just before we started this show, Rich, is that the left-wing media, and obviously I don't buy into the right-left, but there definitely is a left-leaning media in terms of their ideology, and the woke mentality, the way they're losing their heads this morning at the very concept there might be peace, at the very concept this war might be over. They're losing their minds. There's an emergency meeting of European nations, including the UK, in Paris today as a result of this announcement of a meeting between the US and Russia. So, okay, it's all theatre, but the media and lots of people that are looking and sympathetically towards Ukraine, they won't necessarily know it's theatre, and they will actually be losing it this morning at the fact this might come to an end, which I find astonishing, because the left wing, the democratic, liberal left, was always the party of peace. It was always the ideology of no war, of no conflict. It was the one behind the, 67 Summer Love movement in San Francisco, campaigning against the Vietnam War. It was the millions that marched against Iraq in 2003. Now, all of a sudden, they're actually losing it at the concept that this war might come to a close. I don't believe it will. I think these talks will produce absolutely nothing, because I don't think they're meant to. Or whatever they produce won't actually lead to lasting peace, because, again, it's not meant to. But the idea that these people can't deal with the fact these two might talk to each other, what's the alternative then? It's absolutely astonishing, Rich, but it's not surprising, is it?
No, because people have got, by the looks of it, winning mixed up with stopping everybody dying. It's what you don't... They've missed the concept of why we do these things, and what's the point is nobody wins in the end of any of these things, especially not the everyday man. So they've got this, I want to win, and it can't be done by Trump. And yes, it's all theatre. It's not done by Trump, obviously. He's come in, Zelensky, Trump, Putin, they're all connected to these bad guys. There is a stage show going on here, and he's entered in left, and he's decided to take over, but he hasn't decided to take over. He's just doing what he's told. And the action man probably didn't realise that was going to happen, because he's not as far up as Trump in the hierarchy. But this is absurd. You either want peace or you want to win. And that is a psychological issue that humanity has. When we look at atomic weapons and we look at all of these things that could destroy us all, it seems to be that human beings want to win more than they want peace, which is a lose-lose situation, obviously.
100%.
It's an ego situation. So there's left and the right and everything in between, and have to get out of the way and say, what is the best for your future children? Step out of the way. Not what's best for what you winning, your political party. Because the fact is, we know that NATO were edging Russia into war for ages.
Yeah,
that's
they were
what
poking them in the
prompted
chest.
this.
Yeah.
They were poking them. So there was a reason. This was a reaction to a problem caused by NATO all the while. And that was set up many, many decades ago.
Yep.
So this whole thing about nobody wins in this situation, guys. Nobody wins, especially not us. Either way, there are no winners here other than peace and stop in this situation. So, yes, it's totally absurd that you would be crying over the fact that war might come to an end, but it's coming to an end, but it's not coming into an end in the way that I want it to come into an end. It's like, it's absurd, and it is an ego problem that humanity has, and this is what leads us to all these wars. It's like, what do you want, peace, or do you want to win? Which one do you want?
I completely agree.
If there's no peace,
I completely agree. And what I think is very important is when something happens, that or something is announced or something is suggested that on the surface sounds really good. So the idea that the US and Russia are going to speak, the two biggest nuclear powers in the world, the two biggest military powers in the world, the idea that they're going to speak and talk about peace, talk about security, talk about ending this, that on the surface sounds fantastic. I think anyone with a brain cell that wants peace and harmony across our planet will be thinking that's a good thing. However, if it appears to be a good thing, when you know the agenda is not to bring about everlasting peace, always look at what the other hand is doing. As we said earlier, we were talking about, a few weeks ago, we were talking about how magicians operate. If a magician's doing his trick in his left hand, he wants you looking at his right. He wants you focused over here so you can't see what's happening over here. And that's how this cult operates time and time again. So with that in mind, just a couple of days ago at a European conference, Ukrainian President Zelensky called for an army of Europe to combat Russian aggression in the event or in the probability that the US withdraws support for European nations. Right? So we know that a world army, we know that a regional army of the Americas, South Americas, Asia, Oceania, Europe, Africa, so on, is part of the agenda. Well, by these peace talks and by Trump supposedly being a maverick and going out on his own and leaving all these leaders hanging to dry, it's given then the justification to at least start this conversation. And I don't know about you, Rich, would you be surprised if after this emergency meeting in Paris today of all these leaders, this army of Europe suddenly becomes discussed a lot more, suddenly becomes a lot more realistic in terms of its prospects? Because we know they want this, and by these actions of Trump, or supposedly these actions of Trump, obviously he's having his strings pulled, it then gives the Europeans the argument or the justification to start the conversation about having a European army, which when it was first floated, I think a couple of years ago, the concept of a European Union army, it was absolutely refuted by many nations and by the general public. If the US withdraws support, all of a sudden, when they bring this idea back again, I guarantee the resistance won't be anywhere near as strong. Problem, reaction, solution once again. So you've got something on the surface that looks good, peace talks, but is it actually going to be used to justify something they want in the end? What do you take on that, Rich?
I think it's a great point, because they can use anything to justify anything. And I think that's what we need to look at, is that they're not got your best interest at heart. So they can use any of these situations to justify any move on the chessboard when you're playing both sides of the game. So it doesn't really matter. All you need to understand, or we need to understand, none of them are trustworthy. So this European army, when people look at this whole US withdrawing support, the US is funded through the City of London. It's controlled through the City of London. We know these things. It's not a sovereign nation like it's always been propped up as. It's a proxy army for this cult. That's what it is. So you have the religious side in the Vatican, which is a sovereign city on its own. You have the City of London, again, is a city on its own. And you have Washington, D.C., which was formerly Rome, Maryland, because this is all this Roman Babylonian cult that goes back. And just look at the architecture. It's all Saturn worshipping cult architecture that goes back through Rome to Babylon. So this cult is just using these nations as labels, as brands, to pit off against each other. So it doesn't matter. The US Army isn't the US Army. It's the cult's army. Yeah. And as people need to understand. So all they're going to do is set up another arm of the cult's army to battle their previous arm of the cult's army. And they're going to bring it down to 2 levels, like a chessboard, that they're controlling either side to create chaos, in which afterwards they can create their world to come, their new world order. And this is how it works. So they create 2 sides, and the bigger the 2 sides are, the more encompassing the 2 sides are, the better, the bigger blocks they can smash together. So that's all that's happening here, is they're reordering the world to collide in a different way. So that's the situation here, and you're always going to have a bad guy. So you've got Russia or China, but actually when you look into the Chinese social credit system, which I've been researching a lot more lately, it's not as widespread and embedded as people think. There's certain towns where they've tried things out. The technology is there to be done, but it's actually not rolled out in many than a handful of towns, and it's not what we've been told these bad Chinese social credit system is yet. Yes, there's potential. The actual, in terms of the security, in terms of the police state, is absolutely. But the system of the social security isn't at the moment. But we're being told it's all locked in and it's ready to come over here. So that implies a response from us to get in there first. Do you see what happens? So they build this demon up, and then we react to it. And that's what's happening here. This demon the US is going to pull out. It's being controlled through the City of London.
Yeah, it is.
It's just all contrived. And it's shame to see that people can't see it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's painting the idea of 2 sides when they, as we speak about very much on this show, this cult doesn't have country borders. They're only there for us to fight about. To them, it's all one. Just a final one on this before we move on, Rich. Just touch on this. UK Prime Minister Starmer has said ahead of going to meet other European leaders in France today that he's ready to put UK troops on the ground in Ukraine. And this is the joke of it. They actually call them British peacekeeping troops, maybe stationed in Ukraine. So I assume if they stationed them there, they wouldn't send them over with any arms, with any military aid, with any weapons or anything like that. Then, of course, they would. So the idea they're there to keep peace is a complete fabrication. But I think what's really important, just to touch on, is all of those people across the UK, all of those mums and dads and brothers and sisters that flew that Ukraine flag and still do, that call for, unlimited support, even though this nation is falling apart. Same in America. How are you going to feel when they send your sons and your daughters and your brothers and your sisters and your mums and your dads and put them on the ground in Ukraine as cannon fodder for this new world order? How are you going to feel then? Are you still going to be so supportive? Are you still going to think that we should give them support no matter what, when it's your loved ones in the firing line? Big question to think about, because the idea of any conflict means loss of life on both sides. And the idea of any conflict that's just ongoing means massive loss of life. Look at the 2 world wars and the incredible loss of life. And that's just the statistics that are known. I guarantee those numbers are very conservative. And that tells you everything you need to know about the damage and the devastation caused by war. So maybe if you're championing this story today, have a real reevaluation of your attitude. And to be honest, have a real reevaluation of your life if you think this is a good concept to go with. But anyway, enough ranting. Rich, moving on. What have you got for us?
I think you're right with that one. I'm just going to lot this, but you're right with that one in terms of do you want to win or do you want to be right? Or do you want peace? It's an ego thing, and I think that's what we need to keep into mind. So this just shows you, as you mentioned, cannon fodder here, how these armies and these psychopaths use people. So IDF reportedly used elderly Gazian as human shield, tied explosive around his neck. This guy was in his 80s. According to a report by Israeli outlet, The Hottest Place in Hell, the elderly man was forced to search for booby traps whilst an IED commander was tied to his neck. He's an elderly man. Later, as he was forced to evacuate south with his wife, another battalion shot them. They were forced to go for 8 hours around their home with an IDF, an explosive around his neck. He was 80 with a walking stick. And then they used him, obviously, as cannon fodder in case something blew up. And then on the way out, another battalion shot them anyway. And this is an example of what we're just saying here. You think you're fighting for freedom and peace. They're going to take you out anyway. They don't care. You are cannon fodder in their game. Let's not play their game, because this is what happens. They will take you out anyway. So they used him. Like they're using these British soldiers, as you just said, to give peacekeeping soldiers to go over there. Their method, not mythology. What's the word I'm looking for?
Methodology.
They're looking as if they're going to basically give them the weapons to go in there, tie an ID, explosive around their neck, send them in there, and let them die.
Yeah,
and that's just going to drag the UK into this proxy war again. So they're using the same thing. Don't be cannon fodder for these lunatics. Please don't. And by supporting all of this stuff and supporting Trump without really looking into what this background, this ideology is, you're becoming cannon fodder for these lunatics. And you don't have to be. None of these want peace. They want to win. But what do you want?
100%. 100%. It's basically a gang warfare that's got way out of hand in terms of the scale of it. You know, gangs operate on intimidation. They operate on manipulation. They operate on pressuring your loved ones and your family. And they also are worth nothing. The head of the gang is worth nothing unless people below do what they say, unless they create the environment for them to be the head of the gang. In the same way that if, you know, there was calls for troops on the ground, if there was calls for airstrikes, you know, Navy strike, whatever, they don't happen unless people press the red buttons. They don't happen unless people get on planes to go over there. They don't happen unless people jump in aircraft to go and do the airstrikes. These people have no power. This is the so frustrating thing. People don't get this dynamic. They can't do any of these things that we're talking about without our acquiescence, without the silent majority being exactly that, silent. They can't do it. They can't do any of it. They're worth nothing. Trump can't do anything without people around him giving him the all clear. Putin can't do anything. Zelensky can't do anything. Starmer can't do anything. These people have zero power. I mean, have you ever seen the picture of Starmer on a punch bag throwing a right hand? Couldn't punch his way out of a wet paper bag. Yet he's the head of the military, so people think he has all this power. He doesn't unless people actually give him that power and do what he says. Mass non-compliance with our own enslavement is the only way that we get out of this mess. And the easiest place, you know, militarily for them to start is just to lay down arms. No, I'm sorry. And, you know, people always harp on about that story in the Second World War, I think it was, or might be the First World War, of the Christmas Day when the Germans and the Allies played that game of football. They put down their weapons, they both walked out to the middle and they played a game of football. The day before and the day after, half of those people were probably dead because they were shooting at each other. Not because they wanted to, because higher-ups told them to. When you break it down, like, you know, I'm very lucky that I've managed to be very well travelled around the world, and I've met a lot of people from so many different nations, demographics, cultures. Most people are actually really nice. Most people are actually very much, you know, have a lot in common. They want to live a life of peace. They want to take care of their families. They want to have nice memories. They want to enjoy the good times. That we're not anywhere near as different as we're made out to be. They need this illusion of separation that they filter down, and they need us to believe that to keep fighting each other. Just deal with people on a one-on-one human level, and you'll find we have a lot more in common than we have that separates us. But you're right. You're absolutely right, Rich, in what you say. These people are just a cannon fodder and used. And, you know, if the real truth came out about not just the IDF, but militaries in general and the things that they've been up to over the years around the world, and the things they've subjected civilians to, it would make your worst horror film seem like a rom-com, I think. Yeah.
It really would, and to show you the power, I wrote about this week, I wrote about this in an article this week, this guy, and he's known as the guy that saved the world, and no one's really heard of him. His name was Colonel Stanislav Petrov. Now, he was a guy that worked at a Russian missile base, and he was responsible for watching missiles come over to Russia, ballistic missiles would carry nuclear warheads. Now, he was told by his computer readout that the US had sent 1 ballistic missile and then 4 following it, and they were coming over. And he decided in his own mind that can't be true. They'd send all the nuclear warheads if they were going to start World War III, nuclear war with Russia. They wouldn't send a few. They'd send a lot. This doesn't make sense. He questioned the computer and he refused to put that order through, which would have triggered a response from Russia, a nuclear response, to the US, and would have started World War III, a nuclear war. One man said, no, the computer is wrong. I'm not doing that. Turns out he was right. The computer was reading cloud cover of the moon and thought it was exhaust fumes from the missiles. He saved the world.
Yeah, he did.
One man.
I remember that story.
And that's an incredible story that shows you that nothing happens without human acquiescence and compliance. We don't have to do this to each other. Let's not.
100%. They can build the weapons, but someone has to fire them. And if you just say no, they're worth absolutely nothing. 100%. Completely agree. Just to touch on one final story very quickly. This week, last week we were talking about RFK and would he get accepted? Would he get the nomination and be allowed to pass through as health secretary? He has. So on the surface, that sounds great, given some of the things that he has said in the lead up to the election and in the past about vaccines, about EMF radiation, about processed foods. But the proof will be in the pudding, as always. So in the next few weeks, as he takes office and as he gets his feet under the table, he was talking about issuing a national inquiry into the benefits, dangers, middle grounds of vaccinations in children. Let's see if that happens. He talked about going to war, metaphorically, with the food companies about highly toxic ultra-processed foods. Again, let's see if that happens. He also spoke about supporting organic and natural farming across America. Again, let's see if that happens. All we can do is hope. I don't believe for a second it will. I don't think you do either, Rich. But you mentioned earlier about being wrong and egos. I would love to be wrong. I'd love him to come in and go absolutely full steam ahead at all those things I've just mentioned and make America healthy. Not again, because it probably never has been healthy, but for the first time, really take those things on. And I would, because that would then, inspire hopefully other nations across the world to take note. I don't believe that will happen, but I really sincerely hope that it does. But as we've spoke about a few times, this is one to watch. Let's see what happens over the next weeks and months. And what's very key, I think, for all those of you who support, and there will be many of you watching this, I imagine, that support Trump, that support Musk, that think, the opportunity we have here is a big one and support RFK. Please hold them to the same level of account you would if it was Harris in charge, if it was Starmer in charge, if it was Macron in charge, and they were doing whatever it is they may do. Because if he goes back on the claims that he said he will do, they need to be held to account. But what we've seen through this presidency so far is Trump do so many of the things that he said he wouldn't. So many of the things that if the other party had done the same thing, you'd be calling it out. And people have just let it slide. That can't continue. The only way that they will stay even remotely honest is if they are held to account for every single decision and every single thing they said they would do and every single thing they said they wouldn't do if they go back on it. That's absolutely essential. So with that one, Rich, I guess time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell. He's also connected to the Habad lot, running around with Shmuley, so there's that connection there. He's very pro-Israel in that sense. Yeah, I actually think he's a good man. I don't think he's I don't think he's one of them. I don't think he has the same psychology as them. I think there's more going on in the background, possibly compromat-wise. These people did a lot of drugs back in the day. I think that he's talking outwardly saying warp speed was a good thing. So, yeah, I know that politics is a game of lying. We said this last week, that can't be accepted. That's not acceptable, that they lie to us because that's just politics. That's not acceptable. They're there to serve the public. So we will see. I think he's a good man in a bad system, but I think he's way beyond being able to do anything. Personally, hope I'm wrong. I really, really do. But yeah, we'll see.
Time will tell, and like you say, we'd both love to be wrong on that one. Well, thank you very much for tuning in with us this morning. It's going to be me and Rich for most of the week. I'm going to be doing it myself on Thursday, but it's going to be us for most of the week as Gareth is sunning it up in 31 degrees. I'm not jealous at all. But this morning's show was sponsored by the brand new range of Ickonic coffee. If you haven't tried it yet, please go ahead. It's a great way of supporting what we do here. And if you drink coffee anyway, then it doesn't even feel like you're spending any more money. Use code TRENDING for 10% off. And as we say, all proceeds go to supporting what we do here. Rich, thanks a lot, mate. And I will see you tomorrow morning.
See you tomorrow. Take care, guys.
Cheers, guys. See you then.